Hello, everyone. I'm glad you're with us today. Right now, I have one of the Marks in the room, and the other Mark is in the other room, and he is headed this way. But I thought I would go ahead and begin to ensure that we have time to cover the 50 minutes of debate. My name is David Crow. It is my pleasure to serve as the moderator of the debate. The question for our debate is it time for an Article 5 amending convention? Our breakout event will be a classic debate format with Mark Allspaw representing the pro view and Mark Moore presenting the con view. Each will have an opportunity to speak for their position or against their position for 9 minutes, and then each will respond with rebuttal for 4 minutes. We will have about 8 to 10 minutes of questions from the floor. We thought we'd use that little ingredient, and then each will have 4 minutes in closing. Before we begin, I'd like to just have a little bio here of both. Mark Allspaw is with Convention of States, is a passionate supporter of the state-led way of proposing amendments to the Constitution as provided in Article 5. He believes it may be the only way available for we the people to stop what he sees as a nation continuing to drift in the direction of tyranny and perhaps even insurrection. Mark's background is in high technology aerospace defense sector. He has taught missile systems technology at military schools, was a member of the Minuteman missile design team, and was a principal in the site activation activities. As a senior programmer manager, he led a number of aerospace projects from conceptual design through product delivery and managed manufacturing integration, test, launch, and post-launch activities of a major NASA scientific satellite program. He has held the executive management positions in connection with the performance of Air Force aircrew training programs, a number of Department of Defense-based operations and maintenance contracts, and for the first-of-kind product line of commercial hybrid electric buses. He is currently serves as the president of Mark Henry and Associates, Inc., a management consulting firm. He is a veteran of the United States Navy. With his wife, Betty, Mark lives in Hot Springs Village since 2003. Mark Moore has been asked by Eagle Forum of Arkansas to present the case against calling for a convention. Mark has a long career as a citizen activist. He has been the communications director of the Young Republicans of Arkansas, the vice chairman of Union County Republican Committee, the chairman of Constitution Party of Arkansas, and the chairman of the convention which founded the Benton County Tea Party. Mark has also served as volunteer and paid campaign staff for various candidates over the years. He helped former state senator Jim Holt win 2 statewide Republican primaries, the last one as his campaign director. Senator Holt told many newspapers that Mark Moore was the best policy guy in the country. Mark is a writer, has produced thousands of articles for his blog, Arkansas Watch, the longest-run limited government conservative blog in the state. He has also authored 2 books on philosophy of government. Mark now works with Neighbors of Arkansas, a group which supports the election of candidates who can answer to their constituents rather than the political hierarchy that runs in Washington, D.C. When he was not out in the state working on projects in the oil and gas industry, the pipeline industry, Mark and his wife and 3 children called Pea Ridge, Arkansas, their home. I'd just like to make a few comments before we begin. I believe it is believed by many of you in this room that on this stage that the federal government that is completely out of control, and as a result, many amendments need to be made to the Constitution. And in that regard, we have 2 options that are available to us in Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, and portion of Article 5 reads this way: the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to the Constitution or on the application of legislatures of 2/3 of several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of several states or by conventions in 3/4 thereof, as one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by Congress. Bob Gregory here in front will be our timekeeper, and he will signal time when it's nearing the end, and when it gets to the point of cutting it off, I'll stand up and the speaker will need to return to his seat. So once again, the question is it time for an Article 5 amending convention? And with that, we will start with Mark Alsbaugh for 9 minutes.
Thanks very much, David, for that introduction. And I want to thank the Arkansas Tea Party Alliance for hosting this event today, in which we'll be considering something that's vital to the future of our country. And thanks to Mark Moore for being here to present the other point of view. I'm reasonably certain that most of us in here share the same values. As it relates to government, fiscal responsibility, limited government, that carries with it all the things like the specific rights that we grant them, and it carries with it the responsibility to exercise those. As it relates to the personal side, there's nothing better than the words of the founders, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But like so many things, in the truly American fashion, we have differing views about how to resolve those issues. My hope is that by meetings such as this, we can come together, and by coming together, we can go forward to try to do something to save our country. Now, for starters, we know that the founders wanted the states to have a way to take over and do whatever was necessary to bring an out-of-control government under control through the amendment process. The way we know this is because it wasn't always so. The original draft, if you will, of Article 5 of the Constitution provided two ways of amending it. One was when 2/3 of either houses of Congress voted to do so, they could propose amendments and send them forward to the states for potential ratification if 3/4 of the states so approved them. The alternative method was that if 2/3 of the states wanted to see the Constitution amended, they could apply to Congress to do so, but Congress would have to propose the amendment. So in either case, it was Congress that was writing the proposed amendments. On September the 15th, 1787, George Mason stood up and said, that's not workable if the federal government strays off the reservation, because even if we petition them to change the Constitution, there's no way that they're going to propose something to correct their own excesses. And so an alternative was proposed, and it's the one that David read to you earlier, where as it relates to the states, if 2/3 of the states apply for a convention, Congress shall call the convention, and then that convention of states can propose amendments. Those amendments will get sent forward to the states, and if ratified by 3/4 of the states, they become a part of the Constitution. Now, let's fast forward to today. Let's let the facts speak for themselves. Today, our federal government has saddled our country with debt and deficit liabilities that are foreordained to lead to financial collapse of our country. They've encouraged a culture of dependency through financially unsound entitlement programs that cannot be sustained and will contribute to the financial collapse of our country. They've hollowed out and misled our national security capability and efforts at times of growing military and terroristic threats against our country. They've abandoned our position as a trustworthy and reliable partner in world affairs, thereby gaining the contempt of our enemies and the distrust of our allies. They've created a ruling class of professional politicians who reside in our nation's capital for decades, beginning as citizens of modest means, and who through no known endeavors amass fortunes. They've established cults of professional bureaucrats who are immune from consequences arising out of acts of corruption, law-breaking, and abuse of power. They've passed laws that overreach beyond the delegated powers of the federal government while also exempting themselves from them. They've imposed tens of thousands of pages of punitive and oppressive regulations written by unelected bureaucrats that have the force of law without legislative deliberations and oversight of Congress. They've established judicial processes where the sole arbiter of the Constitution is an unelected group of 9 people in black robes with no effective way to challenge their judgments. They've inserted government into virtually every aspect of our lives, far beyond anything ever contemplated by the founders. A government whose character is marked by such acts is on the doorstep of tyranny and should not be permitted by a free people to continue unchecked. Amen. Say amen. Amen. So what are we to do about it? What are the options? One is acquiescence. Shrug our shoulders, fold our hands, and say there's nothing we can do about it, and let things be as they may. We can hope for an inside the Beltway solution. Elect different people. How many election cycles and how successful are you going to have to be before you can get a group of people in Washington that can turn a corrupt Washington around? Civil disobedience may be an option. We can prepare for an actual armed revolution, or we can turn to Article 5 in the Constitution. As we sit here today, Washington fiddles while the world is burning. And Article 5 of the Constitution sits there in plain sight, providing a lawful, peaceful path for the people and the sovereign states to rise up, rein in an out-of-control federal government, and restore our constitutional rights. It is time to use it. That's what the Article 5 Convention of States movement is all about. There is room for every citizen who cares about the future of our country to be a part of this movement and to help bring about a new birth of freedom, one that will restore our unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thank you.
Okay, now speaking for the case against is Mark Moore for 9 minutes.
Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It's wholly inadequate to the government of any other. John Adams said that. I didn't say it, it's not my line. He said it, but he was right. I agree. I go further. Not any religion, but the Judeo-Christian tradition, the gospel, has made men free. Do you know that the norm for mankind, tyranny was the norm for mankind before the gospel was delivered to man. Tyranny is still the norm for mankind in areas where the gospel has never been ascended. And tyranny is once again becoming the norm for mankind in places where the influence of the gospel has waned, including America. When I was 13, my mother, and my mom is here tonight, and I have all kinds of reasons to love that woman, but none more than this. When I was 13, she challenged me to read the book of Romans. And I read the first 8 chapters, and I found the gospel there, and the gospel found me, and it made me fit to be free, fit to live under government with a constitution such as ours. My point is basically the same point that everybody out there made and you agreed with, is that the only lasting solution to our troubles lies in improvement in America's moral and spiritual character, not in trying to put better and better rules on worse and worse people. The left doesn't understand this. The left does not understand the vital connection between faith and freedom. The left, they're supposed to be the ones that don't understand the limits of what more government can do, what more laws can do, what more rules can do. Come to think of it, there's not a whole lot the left does understand. You know, it's like, I'll tell you why. They put their feelings above their thinking. When they see a mass shooting, they feel bad and they want to do something. But it's not about solving the problem, it's about making them feel better because they did something. And so, you get this kind of nonsense. What's their solution when there is a mass shooting in a gun-free zone? Let's make all America a gun-free zone. It makes no sense. Now, we can snicker at them for their acting out of frustration and going for an idea that, you know, it doesn't make sense as a solution. But we are not immune to the temptation of letting our frustration mislead us. I would suggest that it's what's happening right here with this question before us tonight. There are a lot of things that need to change in America, friends, but the Constitution is way down on the list. The Constitution hasn't failed America. America has failed the Constitution. It was made only for a moral and religious people. Remember, our ruling class is just not the sort of people it was made to govern. That includes Article 5. Look at the text of Article 5. I'm amazed with all this talk about the Article 5 Convention that so little discussion has been made about the actual text. Who is it that writes the call to the convention? It's Congress. Who is it who determines the method of ratification? It's Congress. There's no Convention of States in Article 5. Those words, Convention of States, do not appear in that order in Article 5. It is a marketing slogan. It's not something that's in the text. The Article 5 Convention is only applied for by the states. As a grant writer might submit an application for a federal grant, it's Congress that writes the call. And what if we say, wait a minute, Congress, you're abusing your authority. You're putting limits on what the states can do, limits on what it's about, limits on who can be delegates. If we cry foul, to whom must we cry? Is it not, my friends, the federal courts? Is it not the same 5 lawyers who, in their delusion and madness, think that they have redefined the institution of marriage? Yeah, it's the courts that will decide any dispute, not you, not I. So I must ask you, is this Congress to be trusted to write an honest call to convention when they have been dishonest in all their other duties? Are these courts to be trusted to make a just ruling of the matter when they have been unjust to the point of delusion and madness in their other rulings? No, friends. Listen, even if the text of Article 5 said just what the Convention of States people think it says, and it doesn't, you have the text right there in front of you, but even if it did, we can't trust this Congress to abide by it any more than they've abided by the rest of the Constitution. We can't trust these courts to interpret it any better than they've interpreted the rest of it. When a failure to follow the Constitution is the problem, amending the Constitution can't be the solution. John Adams was right. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It was made to restrain FedGov, but not a FedGov of rascals such as we have today. We can't fix this by giving the rascals more rules to break. We have to do the hard work of replacing the rascals. Just like with gun control. If you keep adding rules, all it does is hamper the good ones from serving us well. The bad ones keep on doing what they're doing. And I know, doubtless you'll say, but even if the feds rig the convention, the states still have to ratify what comes out of it. So what? If we could trust the state government, what are we still doing in Obamacare? What are we still doing in Common Core? Is that something that people had a hue and cry for? The state legislature recently sent us an amendment to our state constitution that they called an ethics amendment. And they also entitled it an amendment to establish term limits. You know what it really did? It greatly weakened term limits, and it made the rules to where it is virtually impossible to nail them for unethical behavior. If they get caught stealing by the Ethics Commission, they've got 30 days to give back what they stole before the Ethics Commission can do anything. There should be no doubt in your mind that they're capable of ratifying a flawed amendment. When the establishment wants something, they have a way of getting it. Backroom deals, repeated votes until they get the vote they want, and then ending the process. My friends, our Congress cannot be trusted, our courts cannot be trusted, our state legislature cannot be trusted. I strongly dispute any assertion that our founders intended Article 5 to fix anything when our government has fallen into this condition. If our executive branch alone was the problem, then perhaps. If our judiciary was the issue, then possibly. If the trouble was a few states were acting poorly, then maybe. But when all are corrupt, when the people's branch, the legislature, no longer represents the people but a party in Washington, when all that is so, there's no solution which does not involve the hard work of taking it back from the people who've stolen it. Our trouble is not our Constitution. Our trouble is our political establishment. The establishment in this country is rotten in both parties. They may dress in nice suits. They may speak in calm, reasonable tones. They may flatter us from time to time. But their policies are killing your country. The hard but honest answer is we must change them, not the Constitution. They want to misdirect your attention off of them. They want you to spend the next 5 years all stirred up about an Article 5 non-solution because that will be 5 more years you're not facing the real problem. How do we replace them? They would rather that we focus on changing our Constitution rather than changing our affiliations away from a political party which has consistently failed America and you. The truth is we have work to do. We have to change before we change the Constitution. Whatever it takes, we've got to change the character of those who govern us, whose fingerprints cannot help but be all over whatever this new thing they make our Constitution into. Thank you.
Now, a rebuttal of the case against Mark Oswald.
Thank you.
4 minutes. 4 minutes.
Okay. Thank you. As Mr. Moore indicated, the problem is not our Constitution. It is our Constitution right now that's the problem. This is the cover sheet of a document that represents the Constitution of the United States. It's almost 3,000 pages long. It contains the analysis of Supreme Court decisions going back for a very long time, with most of it in the last 100 years. 3,000 pages or so. We are now ruled by case law and not what you think is the Constitution. You think about the Constitution as the 4-page document that's written on broadsheet together with the amendments. I do too. I wish that's what we were being ruled by. This is what's taught in schools as constitutional law. The only way to overcome this kind of thing is by amending the Constitution and throwing it out. It's called Conan, if you want to look it up. Conan standing for Constitution Annotated. Now, Article 5 says what it says. It's pretty straight. I hear from Mr. Moore that nobody is to be trusted, that our legislatures are not to be trusted. No one is to be trusted. Here's what the founders said about Article 5. It would be improper to require the consent of the national legislature because they may abuse their power and refuse their consent on that very account. That's George Mason at the Constitutional Convention. He went on to say, No amendments of the proper kind would ever be attained by the people if the government should become oppressive. Alexander Hamilton said, by the 5th article of the plan, we may safely rely on the disposition of the state legislatures to enact barriers against the encroachments of the national authority. The state legislatures are in charge, not the Supreme Court and not Congress, not the federal Congress. It moreover equally enables the general and state governments to originate the amendment of errors as they may be pointed out by the experience on one side or the other. I can go on with quote after quote. The ultimate arbiter is the people of the Union, assembled by their deputies in convention at the call of Congress or of 2/3 of the states. Some more modern interpretations of Article 5. Abraham Lincoln, I venture to add that to me, the convention mode seems preferable in that it allows amendments to originate with the people themselves instead of only permitting them to take or reject propositions originated by others. Through their state legislatures and without regard to the federal government, the people can demand a convention to propose amendments that can and will reverse any trends they see as fatal to true representative government. The Constitution provides for both methods, and the convention is a safety valve gaining the people a chance to get to act if Congress refuses. That's what Ronald Reagan said. Now, those are the things that you need to be aware of. When we start saying we don't trust our legislators at any level to do the right thing, then it's time to go for the guns. Yep. Thank you.
And now, the rebuttal for the case for Mark Moore. 4 minutes.
Or maybe it's time to leave a political party that has not done what you wanted them to do and start one that does, as some of the Whigs did 150 years ago. That's how we got the Republican Party. So I'm not saying we go for the guns. There are other solutions. I wish we had time to discuss those other solutions tonight. Just to rebut some specific things that he said. When he quoted George Mason, I thought this might happen. That's why I have a quote from Edmund Burke and George Mason agreeing there. You know, George Mason still voted against ratifying the Constitution. The changes made in Article 5 did not satisfy what he objected to. It made it sound a little closer, but he asked, the second to the last day, he said, hey guys, can we have another convention of the states with a general convention? Not in Article 5, but a process like they had before with convention of states, a true, real one, and a general convention to fix what I see are problems in this Constitution, such as no Bill of Rights at that time. And they told him, no, this is it. We're going to vote on this one or nothing. And so he voted against it. So you can't say that George Mason thought Article 5 was going to be a solution to anything. And George Mason was one of the smartest. He was one of the ones that turned out to be right about what kind of government we'd wind up with. So, yeah, I don't see that. I think he's leaving off some of our choices as far as shrug shoulders, inside solutions, more elections. I'm advocating doing them differently. Don't outsource the job of representing you to a party controlled by Washington that has no intention of doing what you want it to do. Or Article 5 convention. So, and these quotes from the founders, I mean, they're good quotes, but does today's ruling class care what the founders thought about anything? No. Guys, it doesn't matter what's in the sales brochures. It doesn't matter what the founding fathers said. What matters, if anything matters, it's what's in the text of Article 5. And there's nothing in Article 5 about the states being in control of this thing. Nothing. The Convention of States is not even in Article 5. Please, look at the text. Don't listen to the salesman. Look at the contract that he wants you to sign. See what that says. One sentence in a written contract is worth 1,000 verbal assurances and 1,000 sales brochures. I know, I negotiate for a living. Do I have any more time?
1.5 minutes.
1.5 minutes, okay. The founders wanted us to have a way for the states to change the Constitution without the federal government. No, really they didn't. Not all of them. Some of them did. The guys who lost did. George Mason and Randolph and the delegates who left because they thought the convention was going too far, centralizing government too much. They're basically the anti-federalists. They did. And so what happened was the Federalists, and some of them, Alexander Hamilton, he basically wanted a king. You know, he wanted the chief executive to serve for life and appoint all the governors. So no, not all of them wanted the states to have a way to change the Constitution. Some of them wanted a very strong national government. And so Article 5 was their attempt to pretend like they were compromising. But George Mason was not fooled. He knew this thing, it still gives, ultimately everything has to go through Congress. So what happens if Congress is rotten? Well, you see the decision flow chart we handed out before. If Congress is rotten, what do? Is you replace most of them. That's what you do. You don't give them more rules to follow because they don't care about the rules.
We're going to have some Q&A. What we're going to do is anybody from the floor that would like to ask a question, you'll ask a question. Each participant will be able to respond for 1 minute. Bob will time the minute. And so with that, let's take the first question right here.
All right, we've been studying this thing at our Tea Party for 6 years now. We've been through the Constitution.
And I need to have a question, not a speech.
I'm going to try to get to
Okay.
my Tea Party sat through the entire Constitution taught by Curtis Coleman. Curtis Coleman said he thinks this thing will work. The reason is you limit the entire thing to 16 words. 22/3 of the states ratified the 16 words, which means you get control of the budget or whatever. Like I said, we've been through this time and time again. This whole thing was brought up once in the state legislature.
So what's the question?
And didn't get out of committee. But what we doing here is the question. Are we going to go shoot each other? Going to shoot people? Or are we going to try to do this thing? This is the last chance.
Are you asking me?
Right. That's not the last
Guys,
chance.
I guess one thing I'm suggesting is, before you go change the Constitution, try changing your political party. They're not serving you.
You can't change the political party. They're all the same.
Just a comment, you know, changing your political party, take a look at how long, if we wanted to re-elect or elect different people, how long is it going to take to change the balance of elected power in Washington? 20 years is what most political sciences will tell you, if you really could make it happen.
Hey, Jackie, question. Question.
Yeah, I'm still debating this in my mind, okay? And mainly because I haven't had the time to research it since most of my focus has been on healthcare. But this is, my question is, how are we going to get our government back? Both of you are saying basically the same thing, that the people need to take our government back.
No.
But the venues that are allowed to us right now, we can't do that. And especially when you have the federal government establishing fusion centers in our states, in our major metropolitan areas, where they're collecting data on you every time you get in your car and you drive around and you do all this stuff. We are living in a police state.
Okay, so the
get
question
your guns-
is how are we going to get
what is available to us? And it's got to be more than political party.
I'd like to answer that in this way. What you can do as an individual is you can begin to lobby your representative, your state representative, to support the passing of a resolution in the legislature of the state of Arkansas to make an application for a convention of states. You can encourage them to join with other states to do the same. If the states got together, that could be made to happen within the next 24 to 36 months. And we could have a convention that could begin to address some of these problems in that time frame. I would encourage you to get informed. You have an obligation to be informed, not just to listen to me or Mr. Moore, but to inform yourself. Study the historical record. There's a booth out there with a lot of information at it. You can go to the Convention of States booth, you can sign a petition, and you can get going.
In the long run, of course, if you want to do anything about it, you find a church that preaches the gospel and you contribute to them, because in the long run, you cannot make a nation of immoral people have a good government. But you're saying, what's an answer now? What's a short-term answer now? Friends, we just have to keep our composure and we have to start the journey. And I've been hearing, since I was involved in politics, and I was a much younger man then, I heard the same thing. We have to, this election is too important. We have to just suck it up and eat whatever poop sandwich they serve us again. I've had enough of that. I'm changing my menu.
Okay, one more question. Jeff?
Question to both you guys. Could we simultaneously do both of what you're proposing? One is to have a convention couldn't be done real rapidly. I mean, maybe several years. Simultaneously get better officials elected and work towards the goals. And if the amendments were such that we found it necessary at that point, could you agree to a consideration at that point?
Did everybody hear the question? The question was, can we do this simultaneously? And Mark, come forward.
I think I said at the beginning that the thing that we need is to figure out a way to bring us together. And I agree with the intent of your question, that we should be working to try. There's no reason in the world why we shouldn't be pursuing a convention of states solution and also trying to get better people elected. Do both. You know, anything that we see that can improve the path towards the restoration of constitutional government is great.
Yep.
We passed out a flow chart, and my artwork was not very good, but it was a flow chart showing, I'm not against Article 5. It's in the Constitution. It's something we should be used. I'm against using Article 5 inappropriately, without the groundwork, as an escape hatch, as the liberals saying, let's pass another law to ban guns so we can feel better about ourselves, even though it won't do any good. The right time to do an Article 5 is when the things in that flow chart that we passed out have been accomplished. Until then, it's all open change.
Dan, you had a question?
My question's really for Mark Moore. You know, the Constitution, like anything that men have had their fingers on, is imperfect. You know, sometimes it fails and sometimes it succeeds in terms of limited government. I've heard some, what I would consider to be kind of loose rhetoric about how the system is corrupt and how the system is rotten from Mr. Moore. And I just wonder, I mean, does that imply, what you're saying, does that imply that the constitutional safeguards against big government have completely failed? Because, I mean, I think that's wrong. And I understand the argument that you're making, Mr. Moore, is that constitutional safeguards never work and are really a waste of time. And I'm wondering if I'm interpreting you correctly when I hear you saying that.
Nope, I'm not saying that. Otherwise, I would be saying reach for the guns. And I didn't say that. But no, I don't consider the rhetoric loose at all. I consider that I've moderated my language because there are ladies present. That's how bad this system is. And basically, there are some safeguards in the Constitution. But I mean, if we're honest, if we look at things, James Madison said, he was a Federalist, let's vote for this Constitution. The powers granted to Congress are few and defined. The powers granted to the states are many and indefinite. And the Anti-Federalists said, no, I think it's going to wind up with too much centralized power and too much judicial control. Now let's just be honest with ourselves. Who turned out to be mostly right? I'm just saying, let's start listening to people who've turned out to be mostly right instead of the ones that have the biggest megaphones. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, in fairness, I want to, does anybody have a direct question to Mark Oswald?
Mark Oswald, no, I want to.
Okay, right here.
I think you mentioned civil disobedience. One of you did.
Mark did. Civil disobedience.
I think the easy answer, changing the Constitution is difficult, changing our leaders is difficult. What's easiest for us is civil disobedience.
She said changing the elected is easy, changing the Constitution is easy. What's easy for us is civil disobedience. So what's the question?
What's wrong with civil disobedience?
So what's wrong with civil disobedience?
As an answer.
When you ask what's wrong with civil disobedience, the very name of it tells you what's wrong. It's you're disobeying something. Now, if you want to take that on, that's your choice. But there are consequences for disobedience.
Right, yeah.
So if you're willing to accept the consequences, go for it. That's
There
your
aren't
choice
enough
to make.
prisons to hold us all.
What's wrong with it is we're expecting everything to change while we keep our past affiliations. I'm suggesting a nonviolent, non-civil disobedience solution. We quit supporting a two-party system controlled by Washington, funded by global money, and we do our own thing.
Yeah.
And let's try that before we try breaking down doors.
Okay, I am at, we really don't have any more time. I'm sorry. We don't have more time for the questions, but we do have time for closing comments. We'll start with Mark Moore for 4 minutes on the case against.
As a rule, the more power you have at stake in a distant central location, the greater the chances are that this power will be used in a way not anticipated by or agreed to by those far away from that location. This is the whole problem with Washington in a nutshell. And a convention, there's no convention of states, an Article 5 convention is a chance to do that in magnified manner. Now, you'll notice that my opponent tonight has failed to address any of my arguments. He's failed to show where in the text of the actual article his guarantees are. That the states will be in charge, that Congress can't do anything, that there's only limited to one amendment, when the text itself says proposed amendments. Again, the sales brochure says Congress must set the date and time for the start of the convention. It has no other discretion. That's what the sales brochure has. But Article 5 doesn't say that. In fact, you look at Dillon versus Gloss. Congress made a rule saying, you ratifying conventions, we're going to put a rule on you. You've got 7 years to ratify this. And then we're taking to court over that and said, there's nothing in Article 5 that says Congress can put a time limit on when the states have the ratifying convention, and the federal courts ruled that the federal government can do that. Realistically, the best case scenario is that Article 5 convention produces amendments that either sound good but are worthless, or they sound good but they're really bad, but we find a way to stop them. Then we waste more time, years more time, on a distraction where we'll have to fight very hard just to keep things from getting worse, just to keep things from getting ratified. And what's the worst case scenario? The worst case scenario is that one of those amendments that sounds good but is really bad slips through. Just like the so-called ethics amendment in our own Arkansas State Constitution. How can you say that something like that can't happen? It just happened. How can you say that the legislature will keep something like that from happening when they made it happen? Nor has the other side addressed my most fundamental argument, not my argument, John Adams' argument. Our Constitution, including Article 5, was made only for a group of people better than the ones currently in charge. And this convention is going to be a government function. Without at least the legislatures on our side, we cannot expect a beneficial result. I know you're frustrated. I am too. Maybe you're angry. Good. I'm furious. Maybe you're even a little afraid. I'm not too proud to admit I'm a little afraid when I see where things are going. But we can't give in to that. We can't give in to any of it. We have to keep our composure. There's too much at stake. We've got to keep our wits about us, and most of all, we've got to keep our courage. If you can't hit a home run, look around and try to hit a single. If it looks like it's going to take a long time to start, then get started. When you're going through hell, keep going. We have to keep the courage of our founders, who put their emotional attachments aside and separated themselves from a political system that was no longer serving them well. That's how America got here. That spirit right there. That's how America was made, and that spirit is the only way she'll be kept. Thank you, and may America bless God.
For the closing comments of case 4, Mark Oswald.
Thank you. Some of the things that Mr. Moore has argued here today are just absolute fiction. George Mason did not oppose Article 5. I want to say something here. The argument was made in the convention about Article 5, but it was approved unanimously. Is there anyone who doesn't understand what the word unanimous means? Every one of them at the Constitutional Convention approved Article 5 in its present language. The language is plain. It can't be distorted by Mr. Moore in the way he does. Mason did not sign the Constitution because he was an anti-federalist. It did not contain the Bill of Rights. That's the reason he did not sign it, not for these vague Article 5 reasons that you hear Mr. Moore talking about. It's a fiction. The speculation, conspiracy theory-based proposition that crazy people will somehow take over the control processes of an Article 5 convention and shove some kind of totally radical, unacceptable manifesto down the throats of 38 of the states is preposterous. If you want to know more about it, there is a Congressional Research Service report that discusses that issue. Congress has no discretionary power as it relates to an Article 5 amending convention. If you prefer that sort of speculative-based proposition, that's okay. But the alternative is, if you accept that, then the reality-based proposition that the government will continue to abuse its power and destroy the very foundation of our republic is going to continue. Which of those propositions do you prefer? What's going on in Washington today, or take advantage of what the founders gave us in Article 5? Thank you.
Okay, let's give a hand to both Marks for presenting today. Okay, now remember, the question is it time for Article 5 amending Constitution or Convention? If you agree, stand up. Okay, so if you disagree, stand up. Interesting. Thank you for coming.
Oh, yeah.